Welcome back to English Through Wisdom. I hope you learned something valuable from our last lesson. It is wonderful to have you here again today.
The day my closest friends turned their backs on me was the same day I finally understood who I really was. I did not lose my kindness that day. I lost the fear that had been hiding inside it for years. Years later, I finally understood the wisdom hidden behind this experience. Welcome to English Through Wisdom. Here, we learn English through powerful stories, timeless lessons, and wisdom from cultures around the world. Today, we will discover a story about kindness, boundaries, and the quiet moment when everything changed for one young man named Amir. Amir was 17 years old, and in the small village of Nishapur, everyone knew his name before they knew his face. He was the boy who carried water jars for the elderly widow at the end of the street, even when his own shoulders ached from a full day in the fields. He was the boy who split his lunch in half for the younger children who arrived at school with empty hands. He believed, with the quiet certainty of someone who had never been proven wrong, that kindness always returned to the one who gave it. His mother used to watch him from the doorway of their small clay house and shake her head with a soft smile. "You will give away the shirt on your back one day," she said. "Then I will still have my hands to work," Amir answered, and she laughed, because that was simply who he was. The village bakery stood at the center of Nishapur, and every morning Amir walked past it on his way to the fields, carrying 2 loaves under his arm, one for his own family, and one for whoever needed it more. It was there, one autumn morning, that a merchant named Rasul first noticed him. Rasul was not a cruel man, not in the way villains are cruel in the stories children tell each other before sleep. He was simply a man who paid close attention to weakness, the way a hawk pays attention to movement in tall grass. He watched Amir give his second loaf to a limping old farmer without a word of complaint, and something in his mind quietly clicked into place. "That boy," Rasul said to his assistant, "never says no to anyone." Within a month, Rasul had borrowed 3 silver coins from Amir, promising to return them by the next full moon. He never mentioned them again, and Amir, embarrassed to bring up money with a respected merchant, never asked. Word travels quickly in small places. Soon it was not only Rasul. A neighbor borrowed Amir's only good coat for a wedding and returned it 2 seasons later, stained and torn, with no apology. A childhood friend named Farid asked Amir to cover his shift at the grain mill just this once, and then again the following week, and then every week after that, until Amir was working 2 jobs while Farid spent his evenings at the tea house, laughing with other young men, and never once mentioning what Amir had given up for him. At first, Amir told himself this was simply the nature of community. People helped each other. That was how villages survived harsh winters and difficult harvests. But at night, lying on his mat and staring at the cracked ceiling of his home, a small and unfamiliar feeling began to grow inside his chest. It did not yet have a name. It felt something like exhaustion, and something like confusion, and underneath both of those, something that felt uncomfortably close to shame, though he could not explain why kindness should ever make a person feel ashamed. "If kindness is good," he whispered to the darkness one night, "why does it hurt so much?" He did not know yet that this single question would follow him for the rest of his life. The people of Nishapur still spoke well of him in public. "Amir is such a good boy," they said at the market, within earshot of his own mother, who beamed with pride each time she heard it. But behind closed doors, in quiet conversations he was never meant to hear, his name was used differently. "Just ask Amir," Rasul told a group of merchants one evening. "He will not refuse you. He never does." Amir began to notice things he had once been too trusting to see. The way certain villagers only spoke to him when they needed something. The way his invitations to gatherings grew fewer, as though people assumed he would simply appear to help set up chairs and carry water, without ever needing to be formally welcomed as a guest. the way his own savings, carefully collected coin by coin over 3 years for a small piece of farmland his father had always dreamed of owning, had quietly disappeared into the hands of people who called him a friend and never once offered to repay him. Still, he told himself it did not matter. He told himself that a good heart did not keep records. Then came the winter that changed everything. A fire broke out in the grain storehouse on the edge of the village, the very storehouse where Farid had been assigned to work that night in Amir's place, though Amir did not know this yet. By the time the flames were extinguished, half the village's winter grain supply had turned to ash, and the elders gathered the next morning to determine how such a disaster had occurred. Farid stood among the crowd, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. When the village elder asked who had been responsible for the storehouse that night, Farid opened his mouth, hesitated for the length of a single held breath, and then said the words that would break something inside Amir that could never quite be put back together in the same shape. Amir was supposed to be watching it. I only stopped by to check on him. A murmur moved through the crowd like wind through dry wheat. Amir stood frozen, his mind struggling to catch up with what he had just heard. He had not been near the storehouse that night. He had been at home, tending to his sick mother, exactly where Farid himself had asked him to be, so that Farid could handle one small errand at the storehouse instead. That is not true, Amir said, but his voice came out smaller than he intended, cracked by disbelief rather than guilt. Farid did not meet his eyes. Rasul, standing nearby, said nothing in Amir's defense, though he had heard Amir mention his sick mother that very week. Nobody in the crowd stepped forward to speak for the boy who had carried their water and split his bread and covered their shifts for 3 long years. The silence of people who owed him everything and offered him nothing was louder than any accusation could have been. By the following week, mothers pulled their children away from him in the market. The old widow, whose water jars he had carried for 2 years without missing a single day, crossed to the other side of the street when she saw him coming, her eyes fixed firmly on the ground. Amir sat alone that night on the low stone wall behind his house, looking up at a sky full of indifferent stars, and for the first time in his life, he allowed himself to ask the question he had been too afraid to ask before. Was I a fool? It was there, in the depth of that particular darkness, that an old traveler found him. The man wore a simple gray cloak, dusted from the road, and carried nothing but a worn walking stick and a small leather bag. He did not introduce himself. He simply sat down on the wall beside Amir, uninvited, and looked up at the same indifferent stars. "You look like a man who has given away everything he owns," the traveler said, "and is now wondering what he has left." Amir turned to him, too tired to be surprised by a stranger's directness. "I have nothing left. Not my coins, not my reputation, not even the people I called friends." The old man nodded slowly, as though he had expected this answer. "Tell me something. When you gave your bread to hungry children, when you carried water for the widow, when you covered Farid's shifts at the mill, did that kindness come from wisdom? Or did it come from a fear of disappointing the people around you?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Amir opened his mouth to defend himself, to insist that his kindness had always been pure, but the words would not come. He thought of the nights he had wanted to say no and said yes instead, terrified of what people might think if he refused. He thought of the coins he had lent without ever once believing he had the right to ask for them back. "I do not know anymore," he admitted quietly. "That is the most honest thing you have said tonight," the traveler replied. "Listen to me carefully, because I will not repeat this twice. Kindness without wisdom becomes self-sacrifice. Compassion without boundaries is not virtue. It is simply permission you have given other people to take from you without consequence. A river that has no banks does not nourish a village. It floods it and destroys everything in its path." Amir felt something shift inside his chest, uncomfortable and clarifying all at once. Then what should I have done? Refused the widow? Turned away the hungry children? No, the old man said, his voice suddenly gentle. You should have given from fullness, not from fear. You should have said no when saying yes would empty you completely. A candle does not stop being generous because it refuses to burn itself out in a single night. It gives its light slowly, so that it may keep giving. He paused, watching the boy absorb this. There is an old saying, one that has traveled through centuries and across many tongues. The wound is the place where the light enters you. Amir looked down at his own hands, the same hands that had carried water and bread and coins for people who had given him nothing but betrayal in return. My wound does not feel like light. It feels like darkness. Not yet, the traveler said, rising slowly from the wall and gathering his cloak around him. But wounds that are faced honestly, rather than buried in silence, eventually crack something open in us, something that was sealed shut before. You will see. By the time Amir looked up again, the old man was already walking down the moonlit road, and he never saw him in Nishapur again. Months passed. Winter thawed into spring, and something in Amir had quietly thawed alongside it. He still helped the widow with her water, but now he asked one of the younger boys to help carry the second jar, rather than exhausting himself completely for a task that did not require a single person's total sacrifice. When a neighbor asked to borrow money he could not comfortably spare, Amir, with a steadiness in his voice that surprised even himself, said, "I am sorry. I cannot this time." When Farid, humiliated and quietly friendless after the truth of the fire eventually came out through the confession of another mill worker, approached Amir with a stiff apology. Amir accepted it without pretending the wound had never happened, and without allowing Farid back into the same unguarded trust he had once given so freely. Rasul, the merchant who had once measured Amir's worth by how easily he could be used, found that his usual approach no longer worked. "I need a small favor," he began one afternoon at the market. "I do not have room for another favor right now," Amir replied simply, and continued weighing grain for another customer. Rasul blinked, clearly unaccustomed to the word no coming from this particular young man, and after a moment of visible discomfort, he simply nodded and walked away. It was such a small exchange, barely noticed by anyone else in the busy market. Yet it marked something enormous, shifting quietly into place. Something curious happened in the months that followed. The village that had once treated Amir's endless yes as an unlimited resource began, slowly, to treat him with something closer to respect. People no longer assumed he would simply appear to solve their problems. They began to ask, rather than expect. And Amir found that when he said yes now, he meant it completely, without the quiet resentment that used to live underneath his old, automatic kindness. His mother noticed it too, watching him from the same doorway where she had once teased him about giving away his own shirt. "You are different," she said one evening. "I am still kind," Amir answered, sitting down beside her. "I just stopped confusing kindness with disappearing."
If you enjoyed learning English through this ancient saying, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need this wisdom today. Until next time, keep learning English and keep collecting wisdom from around the world.